Well, I have to start somewhere, don't I? The town in question is called Bracken Falls, located in the great state of Indiana. Now, before you run off to mark it on your maps as a place to make sure to never visit, I want to say that you would be perfectly safe. And if you want to go on one of my tours, feel free. It's not average citizens that go missing. Yeah, I said my tours. Let me explain. I moved to the United States for college. My family in Serbia all pulled their money together to fund the trip after I finished school. Everybody was really supportive of my plans to get an archaeology degree. They knew that I've always loved visiting historic sites and staying up late reading about those that I'd never seen. The problem was, though, I didn't really plan any further than getting through college. I didn't plan for the event that it would be hard for me to find a job, much less a high-paying one. Especially in the Midwest, where a building that was a laughable 100 years old was considered ancient. I was homesick after 4 years, and I wanted to move back, but there was still so much to do. I would have to get rid of my place somehow, all of the possessions that I had piled up in my little apartment, and buy a plane ticket back. And oh yeah, I had to pay off my college debt. So I stayed in Bracken Falls, working odd jobs that were only remotely related to my area of study. That's where I met Steve, a bank teller that worked way too much and got paid way too little. My latest gig was a substitute high school history teacher, and when Steve came home with a thick envelope of $100 bills. "We're rich, Cream Puff," he said, grinning ear to ear. He never called me by my real name, Zlata, by the way, preferring to use increasingly creative, and by that I mean dorky pet names. He was extremely outgoing and easily excited, and our relationship had gone kind of fast, but he was just impossible not to fall in love with. Since I was more grounded, he was the perfect match. "Where did you get that?" I inspected the money, not letting myself get excited without first knowing where it came from. Other men might have lied or dodged the question, but Steve was always honest with me. From what I gathered, there existed in Bracken Falls a faction of organized crime almost as old as the town itself. If Steve kept doing work for them, he would bring even more fat envelopes home. Was I concerned about that? Of course I was. But did I ask him to stop? Well, as I mentioned, we were poor as hell. Even with our jobs, it took careful budgeting and restrictions to pay all our bills off on time. There was always a trace of fear buzzing in the back of my mind that something would happen before rent was due, and we would be left out on the streets. Plus, I was no stranger to brushes with illegal activity. My family was big, and at least 2 of my uncles made no secret of operating outside the law. Other relatives probably did without us knowing about it. This went on for about 6 months until one day, Steve informed me of a new job opening. "You know the old tunnels under the city, Frosting?" He slung an arm around my shoulders. I cringed at the nickname and I playfully shoved it off, freeing myself. "Yeah, what about it?" "They've been renovating them and they want to start giving tours. Put Bracken Falls on the map as a tourist destination." "For some old sewage tunnels?" "They are so much more than that, Sunshine. They were initially constructed to connect the town to a bunker during the Cold War. And they never finished building them or even got to the bunker, but there's quite a lot of tunnel." So, they're looking for a guy to take groups through the tunnels and tell them about their history. You'd be perfect for it. "How much would I get paid?" I asked flatly. I was currently a manager at a local secondhand clothing store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was, financially, a step up from being a substitute teacher. He named the rate, which was, as I expected, less than my current wage. And then he whispered in my ear, plus a bonus from the higher-ups, 3 times as much. I lifted an eyebrow, interested against my will, even though the offer did sound too good to be true. Just for giving tours. I found it hard to believe that Steve's bosses would pay us even more money just so I could take a job as a tour guide, but as it turned out, that was indeed all that was required of me. The tunnels were surprisingly vast. They were underground caverns with walls made of concrete in some places and brick in others. The space wasn't that big, but all of it, the arched doorways, the random pillars, they all looked the same, so you could easily get lost if you didn't know where you were going. There were also 2 levels, the main cavern that was higher up, and a basement of sorts that had narrowed tunnels and a rather unpleasant drop to a chasm that was, judging by the smell, probably a sewer. The sound of rushing water could be heard echoing no matter where you were in the tunnels, even on the upper level. I luckily got the job, either through my own credentials or from Steve's higher-ups pulling some strings. As it turned out, the tunnels served as a punishment ground for members of the organization that had disappointed in some way. They would get invited to go on a complimentary tour with some higher-ranking members, and then they would get taken aside to the lower level and punished. Even I wasn't sure what that entailed. It was rare for other people on the tour to notice someone go missing, but when they did, I would just have to casually explain that they had stepped out early. And that, along with turning a blind eye towards everything, was the extent of my involvement with Steve's organization. Soon after I started my job, Steve proposed, and a few months after that, I came home from one of my tours and I plopped my heavy bag onto the kitchen counter. My shoulder nearly sang in relief. Steve looked up from his knitting. It was a hobby of his, and it was rare that he got to indulge in it. I love seeing men engage in traditionally feminine crafts, and it was especially cute when Steve did. Right now, he was about halfway done with a thick, fuzzy green scarf for the up-and-coming winter. "Hiya, sugar." He grinned even as his needles kept working, making rhythmic taps. "How was work?" "Oh, the usual." It had just been a regular tour this time, no gang punishment. I just had a couple from Ohio who... Oh hell. I sighed as I rummaged through my bag. "What is it?" "I dropped my bag during the tour and I thought that only my phone had fallen out, but I guess my charger did too." Finally satisfied that it wasn't just hidden in there, I pushed it away from me in frustration. "Yikes, what's your phone at?" 30%. It might last the night. It might not." Steve put up his network carefully on the table, his eyebrows coming together. I knew that he couldn't give me his charger. He had an Android and I had an iPhone. I know, it's stupid to just have one charger. But my second one had broken just a week ago, and I hadn't gotten around to getting a new one yet. "You sure you dropped it at work? You can just get it tomorrow." "Yeah, but I was planning on FaceTiming my folks." I shook my head, accepting that the situation was out of my control, and I smiled. "I guess you'll have to talk my ear off instead." To my surprise, Steve's face fell. "I'm sorry, babe. I promised some of the guys that I would get drinks tonight." "Oh, that's fine. I'll just watch a movie or..." No. If it was just my buddies, I would cancel. I have so little free time that I want to spend as much of it as possible with you. And you know that." He grinned quickly before going back to looking disappointed. "But it's not just random friends. It's the guys at the..." "Yeah, the organization, I got it." It really wasn't a big deal, and Steve's constant apologies were making me feel like I had to convince him of that. I trust my fiancé. I'd never been one to force him to spend time with me, let alone ditch his friends to do so. I know that one of his previous relationships had been a girl like that though, so I understood why he seemed to feel so guilty. I hated his ex for conditioning him to make him feel like it had to be either me or his friends, but he seemed to be slowly working on it. After he left, it took less than an hour of bumming around the house before I decided to go back to the tunnels and pick up my charger. It was only a 10-minute drive after all. The night was cool and I shivered a little as I got out of my beat-up old Toyota. Though the street was empty, I parked in my usual spot out of habit. The car was almost impossible to see with what the darkness and the low-hanging branches of a nearby tree. By this point, I was so familiar with the layout of the tunnels that I probably could have navigated them without using my dying phone as a flashlight. But I didn't feel like tripping on a loose rock tonight, and I quickly located the charger lying right where I had dropped my purse just hours ago. Just as I shoved it back inside my bag, getting ready to turn around and leave, I heard the echo of a key turning in the lock. And by lock, I mean the padlock on the gate, keeping random people from entering the tunnels during non-business hours. I switched off my phone flashlight immediately, and I hid behind one of the pillars that I knew was nearby. I spent only a few seconds in complete darkness before a dim, yellow light shone from the direction of the gate. Quiet male voices followed a second later. "It's so different being here at night," I heard someone say, followed by a handful of yes and ahas. Some of my alarm receded, and the pillar that I had chosen to hide behind kept me out of sight completely, and it was far enough from their flashlights that I couldn't even look out behind it while still remaining hidden in the shadows. I did so, and just as I suspected, it was a group of Steve's acquaintances from the organization. I even recognized most of them. They were all dressed casually, and if it wasn't for the fact that they were creeping in the Bracken Falls tunnels past midnight, they would have looked for all the world like a regular group of guys after a night out. So that explained why they had a key to the gate. Technically, if not legally, the tunnels were actually their territory, so there was no reason to call the police on them. But they probably wouldn't have liked it if they found out that I was there, so I planned to wait until they went down to the lower level before slowly sneaking out. The only thing that kept me from following through with that plan was that Steve was there too. As far as I knew, they only visited the tunnels for one purpose. But why come down here to punish someone in the middle of the night, instead of during a tour like usual? Just as I predicted, they filed down the steps to the lower level. After a brief moment of hesitation, I followed. We were already underground, but I felt the temperature drop with every step that I took. Still keeping to the shadows, I crouched in a corner that I knew was very hard to see into. "You know why we're here, don't you, boys?" said a quiet, authoritative voice, and their fake cheerful chatter ceased. Just before all their heads turned to face Steve, I had the realization the reason they were here at night was because they knew that I would be there during the day. What little honor there was among thieves apparently prevented them from disciplining a man in front of his fiancée. "I'm sorry," Steve cried, falling to his knees at once. "I know I shouldn't have taken some of the money, but Zlata's birthday is coming up and I wanted to get her something special. It was stupid of me and I was desperate. I'll never do it again, please." He clasped his hands together and I felt a spark of anger towards the men who were making my fiancée beg. "I appreciate your honesty." The man who had apparently been in charge didn't sound like somebody I had met before. He stood with his back to my hiding place so I couldn't make out his face. Steve didn't speak. I suspected that he was barely breathing. I knew I wasn't. I wanted so badly to go down there and, I don't know, help him somehow. But that was the thing. I didn't know. I didn't think that it would help his situation for me to suddenly appear. And with what little hope I'd had that Steve's honesty would let him get away with a minor punishment, even a pay deduction, because we'd have to get through that somehow, was dashed when the man added, but that honesty is too little and too late. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to keep from screaming by clapping both hands over my mouth as they shot my fiancée in the head. They did it multiple times. I don't think that I was entirely quiet, but none of them seemed to hear anything over the sound of the gunshots. In the dim yellow light, Steve's former friend's eyes seemed to shine with excitement. Take him to the usual place. The pool of blood had reached the anonymous man's shoes, and he left dark footprints on the stone as he walked away from the stairs and towards the sound of rushing water. Still crying, I waited until they were all gone before scrambling back up the stairs and out of the gate. It was a good thing the streets were empty on my drive back home, because my vision was swimming all the way back. Yet I didn't go straight home. I drove around town a few times, gathering my thoughts. I would go to the police first thing in the morning and explain everything. The organization would no doubt find out that I had done it, and I'd probably meet the same fate as Steve. But I couldn't even consider doing nothing at all. There were countless movies where a woman avenged the murder of her loved one by slowly and methodically taking down the organization that had done it. But I knew that would be beyond me. I would have to settle for doing what little that I could. I finally stopped by my apartment and I climbed up 4 flights of stairs in a daze. I was so lost in my own head that I didn't even notice that the lights to my unit were on until I shut the door behind me. My mind suddenly snapped back to the present. Had I forgotten to turn them off before leaving? Or had somebody broken in? In that case, I suddenly realized why all the lights were on. It was because I was not alone. There, sitting at the table knitting, was Steve. He was in the same position that he had been when I came back from work hours ago. Black hair falling into his eyes as he squinted down at his work. There was a moment where I had a crazy thought that my overworked brain had imagined everything that had just happened. But then I saw that the knitted scarf was almost complete. And then he looked up and spoke. "Welcome back, Zlata."